I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, the EU is looking to expand. They had a meeting in Luxembourg, and they're looking at many Balkan nations, many Balkan states. And the two that seem to be on the fast track right now are North Macedonia and Albania. But during this meeting in Luxembourg with European leaders and foreign ministers, they cannot reach a consensus to actually fast-track these nations into the European Union. Now, North Macedonia is on the fast track to NATO as well. I believe Albania already is a member state of NATO. Of course, we've had videos where we've documented the name agreement between Greece and what was FYROM, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, which is now accepted to be called North Macedonia. So we documented that in a video as well that we did. Alexander, what does this tell you, the fact that the European Union cannot reach an agreement, a deal, a consensus to actually get talks moving to put these countries into the European Union?
Yes, I think what's really very interesting is that here we have another example of what the bureaucracies in Brussels, and it's important to remember that Brussels houses both the EU and the NATO bureaucracy, and the two work extremely closely with each other. So the bureaucracies in these two, in Brussels, both want North Macedonia and Albania in the EU as fast as possible so that they can consolidate the power of the Western alliance in the Balkans, where they've convinced themselves that they're facing this great challenge from Russia, and where Serbia remains a problem. And at the same time as the bureaucracies want this to happen, and the leaderships in Washington and London and Berlin want it to happen, there is more and more opposition now starting to come from the grassroots of the EU. And it's coming from different countries. So Albania in particular, there was strong resistance from France and the Netherlands, because they don't want to see more people coming from Albania taking advantage, and North Macedonia taking advantage of the free movement within the EU and settling in their countries at a time when there is strong opposition in those countries to movements of migrants or of workers across the EU from poor countries to rich ones. But there's also increasing concern from other countries within the EU, such as Cyprus, which are becoming increasingly unhappy with the fact that it's not getting the kind of diplomatic support from the EU that it was expecting or feeling it had a right to, in connection with its present conflict with Turkey over Turkish drilling in waters, the sea, near Cyprus, which Cyprus considers to be, rightly in my opinion, part of its territorial seas. So we see this constant conflict now at almost every level of the EU between the hardline Atlanticists, integrationists, globalists, who are constantly pushing their project, which is a project to integrate and deepen the EU, to centralize it as far as possible, to remove sovereign control from member states, and at the same time to expand it so that eventually all European states will be a part of it, except Russia, which will be the permanent enemy. And at the same time, you see the people of the various countries that make up the EU fighting back, pushing back, insisting on their sovereign rights, not wanting to see more workers, or in the case of Turkey, wanting to assert themselves diplomatically in a conflict that for Cyprus is existential.
Alexander, the European Union has no value anymore, if you want my opinion, as this elite, select bloc of nations. Because it seems to me it's more like, a we'll take anybody type of club.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
I can't figure out what is the value that all of these countries are going to add to the European Union. And even more to the point, what is the value the European Union is going to add to Albania, North Macedonia? They're talking about Kosovo. They're talking about Bosnia. They are even talking about Serbia as well. I mean, why would these countries, number one, want to enter a broke, bankrupt, dysfunctional, authoritarian European Union? Number one, and number two is, why does the European Union, which was supposedly this select club of member nations back in the day, why are they looking to expand all the way to Albania from one end, to Georgia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan? And I mean, it's just getting to the point of ridiculous.
The EU today, let's be clear about this, bears absolutely no connection to the EU that I remember in the 1960s and 1970s, when, of course, it was the European Economic Community, a group of wealthy Western states led by Germany and France that had come together in order to better trade with each other. EU of today. Today's EU is two other things. Firstly, it is a geopolitical project. That is why it is expanding all the time. It is a geopolitical project driven by the neoconservatives in Washington and London, and to a lesser extent Berlin. And its job is to bring all the states of Europe into the EU, which is now, in effect, a component part of the Western alliance. The EU of today is simply the political branch of NATO. NATO is the military branch of the Western alliance. The EU is its political branch within Europe. That's its first reason. That's why it's expanding all the time. As to why all these countries want to join this venture, well, I suspect that if you were to go out and meet people in places like
Tirana or Skopje,
well, exactly, I suspect that more and more of them are increasingly skeptical. But the elites of these countries are very keen to join the EU for two basic reasons. Firstly, it's a way of getting a membership of an elite club that brings them a place at the table, as they think, in Brussels and in Washington. But I think the major thing that's driving this is money. Because the other thing the EU has become since the 1990s is that it's become a network for providing central funding to East European and Balkan elite individuals through the agency of what Europe calls the structural funds. These are funds for building roads and railways and ports and airports and whatever. But of course, the way that the contracts are arranged are highly beneficial to various elite individuals in these countries. And that, I'm sorry to say, is, I think, a prime motivator behind this process.
Yeah, the EU structural funds is just one big racket. That's all it is. I mean, I've seen it in Greece and I've seen it in Cyprus. This money that supposedly is going to the roads and to infrastructure. They even have it earmarked for startups and for other ventures like that. It never gets to, people, the basic everyday person. It's always going to companies that are connected or are a subsidiary part of a larger company. I'll give you an example, Alexander. In Greece, for example, they have like these structural funds or these funds from the EU, which supposedly go to technology companies and startups. But what the Greek companies would do is these large Greek tech firms, what they would do is they would just spin out subsidiary firms, staff them up with like 4 or 5 people, and they would act as a startup, and they would just suck up these funds. So I mean, the whole thing is just one big racket.
I've seen the same thing, and if you go out into the sort of little towns and villages, and you hear people being, promised all these roads, and they never appear, or roads appear in all the wrong places. But of course, there's contractors who are hired to build these roads, which, as I say, go to all the wrong places, and they do very well. And as you correctly said, it's a racket. But I think that the importance of the structural funds in acting as the glue, binding the elites together and encouraging them to join, simply cannot be underestimated. And especially in Eastern Europe, I mean, it's becoming a major driving factor now. I've seen it in Bulgaria, by the way, where I have family connections. I saw it in action there for myself.
What does it mean for Serbia if and when North Macedonia and Albania become part of the EU? And North Macedonia then eventually enters NATO, which I think will happen much sooner
I agree.
than the EU part.
Well, I mean, I think that will consolidate the sense in Serbia that the country is under siege. I mean, it is now surrounded by NATO states. There's growing pressure on Serbia to accept the territorial losses which were imposed on it in the Yugoslav wars, and the fragmentation of the Serb people through the loss, of any kind of sense that they belong to one polity any longer. And there's also, I think, pressure on Serbia to go against the country that has always stood by Serbia and has always been its friend, which is, of course, Russia. But ultimately, and this is something one needs to understand, all this is a dangerous bluff. Because if there is a big war in the Balkans, which I predict one day there will be, because Serbia is now being surrounded by these micro-states like North Macedonia, like Kosovo, like Bosnia, like Montenegro, which are not self-sustaining and not able to defend themselves, against which Serbia has grievances. It's got grievances against all of them. If there is a war in the Balkans, the West will not run to the rescue of these countries, especially with Russia today being far more powerful and far more willing to act on NATO's behalf than it was on Yugoslavia's behalf than it was in the 1990s, and with Serbia far more powerful than any of these microstates any of these microstates are, either by themselves or in combination. So NATO is playing an incredibly foolish and dangerous game in the Balkans, one which risks calling its own bluff.
And finally, Alexander, very quickly, the fact that the EU is expanding to include so many countries.
Yeah.
How is that going to affect, the decision-making process in Brussels? I mean, are they ever going to be able to get into any kind of consensus that benefits the actual citizens of each individual member state?
No, of course not. Because
35, at the end of the day, you're going to have 35, damn member states sooner or later. I mean, how can you make any decision?
You can't, is the short answer. I mean, it becomes impossible. I mean, there can be no conceivable situation where you have coherent decision-making if these countries that make up the EU are going to retain any genuine independence. What you're going to have instead is what is actually happening, which is growing centralization, with decisions being actually made by an ever smaller group of people and being imposed on the rest, because that is the only way the EU can function. So ordinary people, will lose control, and they will in Tirana, in Skopje, as much as they are losing control in Lyon or Orléans or in Munich or in Salzburg or wherever.
Yeah, very well said. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran, thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below. Click on the notifications bell to make sure you get notifications every time we push out a new video. Smash that like button. Follow us on Instagram, the Duran_com. You can also contribute to us, donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and now Subscribestar. That really helps us out a lot. And go to the Duran shop, and you can pick up a long sleeve Duran shirt, a V-neck Duran shirt like what I have on, and I know that Alexander also has somewhere on his desk some magic mugs, Duran magic mugs, which boost your IQ by at least 50 to 100 points. Your geopolitical IQ. I don't know about other parts of your IQ, but your geopolitical part definitely boosts it.
I certainly feel an awful lot better in every part of myself, Alex, for drinking from these mugs. But can I talk about this shirt? It's a wet, cold day out there, and now I'm wearing this beautiful shirt, which, unlike nearly every long-sleeved T-shirt I've ever had, is actually incredibly stylish. It fits beautifully. It's extraordinarily comfortable. It's perfect for this sort of cold, wet weather. It's 100% cotton. It's beautifully made. It irons, by the way, incredibly well. I should say, because we've been ironing all our shirts, and you can see that it's also got very stylishly just above the heart our Duran logo. And I have to say, the other thing I'd say is I chose this color, and I think it's a beautiful color. All of them have these very refined, elegant colors. There's nothing garish or cheap about these shirts, because they're not. They are good, elegant shirts. They're comfortable. They're great to wear. You will help us by buying them, and you will help yourself when you wear them. And as for these mugs, well, here they are. They're also beautifully made. Some of our friends in London have now been buying them, and they actually commented to me and said what fine mugs these are. Beautifully made. They hold hot tea, which I drink my tea very hot, like most English people do. And here it is, and I never burn myself on it, but it keeps the tea warm, and it's perfect to drink from and perfect to handle. And you can see that it's also got our Duran logo there, the double-headed eagle, pointing to the east and west in both directions, because, as Alex said, these are magic mugs. So they give you knowledge of all the world, not just part of it, and geopolitical knowledge. And it isn't just the geopolitical IQ that, as I said, you get enhanced from them. And here we have the other mug, which is my wife's mug, which has the coat of arms of Moscow, which has a connection for us, because that's where Alex and I first got to know each other. We had a chance meeting there. And also, you see St. George on his dragon slaying the dragon. Sorry,
on his horse, slaying the dragon.
On his horse, slaying the dragon of untruth and fake news, which is what we do on the Duran. So it's very appropriate mug for us. It's a beautiful mug. Anybody who drinks tea or coffee or hot chocolate, as we've tried, by the way, it was excellent for that, and or beer, as I've also done, will enjoy drinking from these mugs and will help us by buying them.
All right. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Until next time, everybody. Take care.